another virtual MOSI. Today is officially Field Trip Friday. So put your hands together because we are going to be taking a field trip to the famous MOSI Backwoods. So this is our educational forest that we have on the grounds of the MOSI campus. And you can enter it right from the parking lot when you come back and visit us after this wonderful pandemic is over. But I want to give you guys a little bit of an idea of what we can see here today. So as we're walking through, feel free to keep your eyes open at things that you might see. I'll try to answer your questions as best I can. My wonderful coworker Janet is behind the scenes answering questions, and my other coworker Ian is working the camera today. So as always, we'll be going through answering your questions. If you haven't seen our other Earth Week videos that have been happening this week, after this live stream is done, or after this video is done, if you're watching it after the fact, make sure you scroll down on our Facebook page to check those out, because we had a lot of fun stuff this week. Awesome. So first things first, we're going to talk about a very iconic tree here in the Tampa Bay area, and that is a sand live oak. And I have a sand live oak right next to me up here. It's this wonderful big tree with kind of these scraggly branches and stuff, and you'll see these all over not just Tampa Bay, but the southern United States. And so this is a smaller version of the live oak. And so this guy only grows up to about 50 feet tall. If you see something that looks like this tree but is a lot bigger, you're probably looking at a southern live oak. One of the ways that you can distinguish between the two then is the leaf shape. So right here on the ground, there's a lot of leaf litter from our southern live oak, from our sand live oak. But one thing we want to make sure that we're paying attention to is this leaf shape. So obviously this was already on the ground, so it has since lost its greenness, but the leaves themselves kind of have an undercut. So I don't know how well you guys can see that there, but that's one of the ways that you can determine that this is a sand live oak. Now throughout the winter and throughout the fall, throughout the winter, these trees will lose some of their leaves and they will fall on the ground. Now we are in an ecology called a sandhill, which means a lot of the ground underneath is going to be very sandy. So I don't know if you guys can see that there. It is a little rainy, so it's a little dark, but you're gonna have to trust me, a lot of the path that we are taking is going to be sandy. And so when those leaves fall, it kind of covers up that sand. And so that's good for the forest because as those leaves decay, it creates places for fungus and for bugs to live and to grow. And that also helps our wonderful little lizard friends as well because they need something to munch on, as well as snakes and frogs and toads and stuff like that. But we here at MOSI, we used to do something called a prescribed burn. And so for this area in particular, if you don't do a prescribed burn, a lot of the undergrowth becomes very, very thick. And if you can take a look out through here, you can see that the bottom part of the woods here is going to be very thick with foliage. And that's because we haven't done a prescribed burn here in a little while. But in a normal sandhill ecosystem, fires are natural, and so the sand live oak actually has fire-resistant bark. And so when a fire happens, it isn't as damaged as some of the other trees. That, coupled with the fact that the branches create this large area of shade, really kind of lowers the undergrowth, or limits the amount of undergrowth it has, which also will limit the amount of fire that will be directly at its base. Wonderful. So keep on coming. Remember, if you have any questions, type them in the comment section below. Awesome. So as you can see, as we're walking, this whole area is going to be filled with leaves. Most of these are from our wonderful sand live oaks that we have, but those aren't the only iconic plants that we have here in the MOSI Backwoods. This guy right here is actually a small saw palmetto. And so these guys get their name because their leaves look like saw blades. And these guys grow about 1/10 of an inch per year. So if you see some of them that are bigger, like these ones over here, you can kind of guesstimate how long some of these saw palmettos have been around. There was a research study done by the University of South Florida that said they could be upwards of 200 to 300 years old. So here's some larger saw palmettos. just to give you guys an idea. And these guys can even get bigger than this one is right here.
How big are the backwoods at MOSI?
That's a wonderful question. I believe the backwoods is about 2 acres, if I'm not mistaken. 2.5? 45. Oh, I'm sorry. My coworker, Mr. Ian, says it's about 45. So these backwoods were given to us in the 1970s. Awesome. So this right here is going to be another tree that you'll see a lot around the Tampa Bay area and in Hillsborough County. And this is a longleaf pine tree. And so this is known for its long needles. And so I'll pull some off the ground here for you so I'm not damaging the tree. But you can see just about how long these guys are. And so these guys, like the southern live oak, or the sand live oak, I'm sorry, are also flame resistant. And indeed, when it drops its seeds, sometimes if there's too much leaf litter on the ground, those seeds can't reach the soil. So it's actually beneficial for the prescribed burns to come through and to get rid of the leaf litter around it, so it can actually continue to produce more and more trees. Wonderful. And I don't know if I mentioned it, but a prescribed burn is essentially a controlled fire. And what that means is that when botanists and ecologists come into an area, they figure out, well, what needs to be burnt, and they have a controlled fire go on through the area. And so they ignite it, and they are monitoring it the whole way, so it doesn't get out of control. And a lot of times it is actually very helpful for certain types of plants. Wonderful. So we'll keep on walking. Now this area you can really start to see the sandhill ecosystem, because one of the ways that you can identify them is as you're walking down a path. If the sides are kind of raised up and the ground is sandy, it's going to be a sandhill ecosystem. My wonderful friend Ian, he's going to point us right down this path right here, which is a brilliant example of that sandhill ecosystem. Wonderful. Now, we have a lot of plants back here at MOSI, but we also have quite a few animals as well. One of those animals in particular is the Gopher Tortoise. Now, the Gopher Tortoise digs underground, and if you want to come over here, we'll show you an abandoned hole. Now, Gopher Tortoises are considered a keystone species because once they abandon their burrows, those burrows are then used by other animals as shelter. And there's been over 300 different types of animals that have been recorded and observed using gopher burrows, or Gopher Tortoise burrows. Now, the burrow right here, you can tell how big the tortoise was by how wide the entrance is. So the tortoise itself is going to be just about as wide as the entrance is here, and it runs for about 60 feet underground, and there's going to be another exit at the other end. Now, if you see one of these in the wild, you might be able to see if it is abandoned or not. You can see this one right here has a whole bunch of leaves that have fallen inside of it. If that is still being in use by a gopher tortoise, those leaves will not be there, and the sand around the outside will be a lighter color, and we'll show you that, an example of that in just a second. But you can kind of still see it here, but around the entrance of a burrow is a skirt. And you'll see that lighter colored sand, and that is also where gopher tortoises lay their eggs during the spring. So if you ever see a gopher tortoise home in the wild, be sure not to step on that skirt, because you don't want to accidentally be stepping on some eggs that are buried underneath there. Wonderful. So I mentioned that you could tell by the color of the sand. If you want to follow me over here, here are two really good examples. So sand can be overturned by a couple different creatures. Bugs, when ants make their homes, they will pull these sand up, but also mole rats and stuff like that digging underneath the ground. And so when sand is new and fresh, especially in the MOSI Backwoods and in sandhill ecosystems, that new fresh sand is going to be a lighter color. And so you can see how this compares to this sand over here, which is a little bit darker. So this has been facing upwards towards the sun for longer than this lighter sand has. So you can determine how long sand has been, or if it's a recent burrow, or if it's a recent anthill happening or not. Now, if it's done And by ants, since they have to pull the grains of sand out individually, the sand itself will be nice and fine, and it won't be chunky. But if it's pushed up from underground by something like a mole rat, the sand itself will actually look chunky. And we did have some couple examples, because I did come out earlier yesterday, but since the rain, it was all kind of smushed together. But be sure to visit the MOSI Backwoods. You can see for yourself all the wonderful stuff that we have back here. Wonderful. So as you guys may or may not have noticed, it is currently raining. And that is good because plants obviously need water to survive. Not to mention sunlight and oxygen and stuff like, or carbon dioxide, sorry. We need oxygen to live. But water also means that it is falling on the streets. And it's falling in parking lots. And we all know that if there's too much water built up, things start to flood. But we as humans have learned that we can build essentially tunnels underground, a sewer system to drain that water. Now we here at MOSI have several parking lots, but we also are lucky because we have a natural filtration system. And I'll be showing that to you guys in just a few seconds. But essentially what happens is in the parking lot, you're sitting there, you turn on the car with your air conditioning, so you have enough time to kind of cool down before you start to drive or after you're all done. And what ends up happening is that there are, you know, oil that drips down, or the coolant from your air conditioning, or if you accidentally open up your door and drop a gum wrapper, all that stuff finds its way into our sewer system. Now, I mentioned we at MOSI are very lucky because we have a natural filtration system that starts in our parking lot, and it goes through a couple different barriers. So on Wednesday, I did a filtration project with you guys with the sand, the soil, and then the stone. And that's essentially what we're doing on a larger scale here. It comes from the parking lot, and it goes into kind of a catchment area. And all along that, there's a whole bunch of smaller grasses and flowers and stuff, and the roots themselves kind of stop some of the larger items from going through. Then it continues to run down, and then the large trees and stuff there are certain types of trees that are good at absorbing nutrients, and it kind of stops and filters out all those like oil and stuff that drop from the cars until we come to an area where the water starts to congregate. And so this is going to be one of those such areas. And even though it is raining, I don't know if it has time to fill up quite yet, but in the MOSI Backwoods, especially if you come here and you're nice and quiet, you can see some animals. We have some raccoons, some opossums, and over here to my right, there are going to be there's going to be some standing water where a lot of the animals in the MOSI Backwoods here can come to get their water. And so once it reaches here, it is almost fully filtrated, and then it continues down this slope here to my left, and then it continues to go into the backwoods. Wonderful. Awesome. So we're going to keep on going. We're just going to talk about 2 or 3 more things, and then I'll let you guys get back to your regularly scheduled Friday afternoon. Wonderful. So I'm going to start talking about things that you guys may or may not have heard before, and that is native and invasive species. So far we've been talking about native Floridian species. So the longleaf pine, the sand live oak, the gopher tortoise, the saw palmettos, which we are still, if you guys are seeing, we still have a whole bunch of wonderful examples. You can see this guy is almost pretty much full grown. This is about as big as they're going to get. And so these, the saw palmettos are actually good as well with prescribed burns, because these fronds themselves only live for about 2 or 3 years, and then they'll fall off to the side, and then those are good because they're very flammable, but it allows the plant itself to develop new leaf tissue. Sorry, I couldn't think of the word there. Awesome. Alrighty, but so we've learned a lot about native species, but there are some invasive species, and what that means is that it's a species that doesn't naturally occur here in Florida, but has been brought here by animals or humans, or sometimes invasive species can be, you know, in shipping containers coming from other parts of the world. And so here in the MOSI Backwoods, we have a species called the air potato. And so the air potato is not necessarily going to be the best for our ecosystem. And so we used to have a partnership with USF where they would come on in and they would help us remove a lot of these. And we do this with our summer camps as well. But unfortunately, like all invasive species, they are really good at surviving. So we do have a couple of examples right on over here, and I will take you guys to there. But one of the reasons why this invasive species is bad is because it wraps tightly around plants. And so it limits their growth, and it can also steal the sun from them. And I'll show you, there's an example right on over here. Awesome. Here we go. So this right here, friends, is going to be an air potato leaf. And it's a little hard to tell on this one, but you can see that these are swirling and wrapping around the plants, the other vines here. And so these leaves will stop the sun from hitting the plants, as well as it will go really tightly along certain types of, along the trees as well, and can cut off their growth. And so an air potato gets its name because it ultimately looks like a potato. And once they get too heavy on that vine, they fall and they drop to the ground, and they take a look a little bit like this. And so I mentioned earlier, I was out here yesterday. This guy was not as tall as it was today. And so you can kind of see why it gets its name. It looks like a potato that has spudded if you leave it in your bag too long, right? And so it gives itself roots, and then it climbs upwards. And so this guy was looking for something to latch onto. Once it finds something to latch onto, it will start to wrap around that very tightly. And so this is going to be a fine example. They don't necessarily all have to be this big. Here is another one as well, and you can see this is it happening on a smaller scale. Wonderful. Alrighty, and I'm going to take these with me because they are invasive and they are seeds, and we don't want them back here in the MOSI Backwoods, so these are mine. But even though they're called potatoes, that does not mean you can eat them because they're actually toxic to eat. So if you find these and you think, wow, free potato, that's not actually what it is. Nobody's just leaving potatoes in woods anywhere. But this doesn't necessarily just have to be in woods. This can be all over the Tampa Bay area. Wonderful. So if you follow me, I'll talk about one more thing. Because as you guys know, it is in fact Earth Week, and Wednesday was Earth Day. And a lot of the point of Earth Day is that we want to make sure that we are taking care of this planet that we are on. It is a National Day of Action. We talked a little bit about how you can recycle water bottles on Wednesday with the filter and the hydroponic planter. But this over here is a good example of why we need to constantly stay vigilant. I mentioned earlier the MOSI Backwoods was donated in the 1970s. And before we received these backwoods, there is going to be this right on over here. This right here, friends, is going to be a large pile of asphalt, right? And this was dumped here even before the woods was given back to MOSI. And you can see it hasn't really been reclaimed yet by the forest. There's a little bit of moss. There's one vine right here that's climbing up over it. But this has been here for about 50 years and still is in existence. And so we always have to remain vigilant to how we're disposing of trash, where we're disposing of trash, and when we're disposing of trash. Make sure that you check out your local Hillsborough, we're in Hillsborough County. You can check out their online portal. They have all this information about recycling as well. And please make sure not to litter, because over here to my left, we are next to a road. And sometimes here at MOSI, trash gets blown off the road and into our wonderful backwoods. We try our best to remain vigilant to clean that up, but it is something that we have to constantly be paying attention to. I want to thank you guys all for tuning in to another fabulous Friday field trip. We'll be joining you guys next week, 1:30 p.m. every weekday, Eastern Standard Time.
Physics.
Yes, we're learning about physics, so we got a lot of fun stuff. We're doing pendulum art, we're doing egg drop. Make sure you tune on in. I want you guys to have a good, safe day and to keep discovering.
Woohoo!